G'day everyone, welcome to another Toon Under podcast, the Southern Hemisphere's biggest and best podcast for all things Newcastle United. Tonight we're going to run our season preview show and we are joined by a very special guest. He's travelled from the Far East back to the Northeast. He's a patron for a cause that's very close to our hearts here at the Toon Under podcast, the Sir Bobby Robson Foundation. You can find him on Pot of the Tyne after you've listened and watched this, and he's the senior writer for The Athletic. It's a big Toon Under welcome, Mr. George Caulkin. George, how are you?
Yeah, I'm all right. I don't know if it's Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday, and I don't know where you are in the world in terms of times, but it's all very confusing. But lovely to be here. Lovely to be here.
Yeah, we're also joined by Jack and Dimi. How are you two guys?
Very good, very good. Nice to speak to George. Thanks for coming on, George. And yeah, looking forward to having a chat.
Dimi?
I'm good, Keegs. I'm excited for the season. I think I'm ready to forget about our local AFL season that's happening at the moment with my team. They're just ruining my day-to-day life, so I need to focus back on the Toon. And we're excited for the season.
Come on, for how long did Newcastle do that for us? I mean, you need a bit of misery in your life. I mean, it's like it's not the same. The issue being optimistic.
The issue for me, George, is most of the clubs that I follow are hopeless. So I have constant misery and constant strain, where generally speaking, every week something happens that's very bad for me. So I'm used to a lot of rubbish. So any positivity I can hang on to.
Well, there's a lot of positivity, so that's good. I mean, I do know exactly what you mean. I mean, it's like this whole thing over the last sort of 2-3 years about rewiring your own head. I mean, it's like there were times last season was very difficult for lots of reasons in terms of the sort of injuries and things like that, and it felt like it kind of went on forever. But I think it got to sort of May or whatever, and Newcastle was still in with a shout of Europe at that point, and sort of it being May and Newcastle having something positive still to go for in a season, it was like, this is actually quite stressful, but it's like a very different stress to the one we're used to. Used to whether Newcastle would stay up or the season has long been finished by then. And sort of rewiring the brain for being good is actually quite difficult.
Very difficult.
I remember when we did qualify for the Champions League, following Liverpool's results was so stressful, and they kept winning every week as well. So I think they won like 10 in a row, didn't they? And then they ended up drawing with Villa, and then that meant we just needed to draw against Leicester. But oh my God, it was more stressful than being in all those relegation battles and everything.
Yeah. At least you could. I mean, unless there was that threat of going down, you could pretty much switch off after January, after we got knocked out of the FA Cup in the third round, which of course is what happened every year, pretty much. And that was not a happy existence. But yeah, that change of mindset. I mean, in that season, you talk about the fourth place season there. I mean, I was still going to the game on a Saturday, sort of expecting us to lose, because that's just what my mindset was and how I was brought up. My stepdad, he took me to Newcastle, for the first time when I was a kid. He always had that kind of mindset. It's like anything other than a defeat is just a nice bonus. And, being blown away every time Newcastle won was such a beautiful feeling. And it's like, oh my God, we're quite good. And then that did shift a bit last season, because I think you can't help it. You understand that the team are good, and you understand that the club are going places, and it's reasonable to expect a bit more than defeat, and it sort of changes the brain a bit. But yeah, no, that fourth place season, and just oh God, that was such a precious year, that where every win still felt like an absolutely beautiful little bonus.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, before we kick on with that, we'll just circle back to your patronage. I'm not sure if that's the right word, with the Sir Bobby Robson Foundation. So, how does that work? That you tie in with them? Where does that rank in kind of like your personal life, work life, general life kind of thing?
Well, I mean, to be honest, that's a nice title that I've got. It doesn't, it's a sort of honorary title, really. And a bit of background for people who sort of don't know. I went to the same infant school as Sir Bobby Robson, albeit a lot later. And he he was always this kind of great aspirational figure for me. When he went on and managed Ipswich and then managed England, of course, incredibly important. When he came back to Newcastle, he was a columnist for the Times, the London Times, who I worked for. And I took on a column that he wrote. I ghost wrote a column with him. So he kind of ultimately became, he was this kind of great hero. Then he was a mentor. Then he was kind of a colleague and a friend. And then I wrote his last book with him, which was about Newcastle, the club and the city. And in my kind of noble wisdom, I thought, okay, I'm not going to take any money for this, and I'll give that fee to his foundation. If I realised how much work it was going to be, I might not have done that. But no, I'm kidding. And so, yeah, when he passed away, he also asked me to be a patron, and so it just means that occasionally I get asked to, turn up at events and be there. And obviously, the Great North Run, which I know Jack knows a lot about. I want to be there. I want to be present. I kind of, if I do a run, I feel like I'm representing him and the charity. And there are kind of events around Newcastle that I try and go to, and I retweet what they say and stuff like that. But I wouldn't want people to think it was this kind of a great big onerous task that I put on my shoulders. It's a lovely reward that I've been given, and it means absolutely huge amount to me, because he meant, in professional terms, he meant more to me than anybody else in my career, and obviously personally too. And his story, from football terms, absolutely incredible. What a man he was, and what a kind of, I think the way I describe it is he had a life of many lives. He did so much, did so much stuff, and to kind of bounce back after England, which has finished off plenty of fine managers, to bounce back and have that sort of mazy run into Europe where he kind of won everything, and then ended up at Barcelona and then came back home to us with such a kind of beautiful story. But then that legacy off the pitch of the work the Sir Bobby Robson Foundation does is just astonishing. And it blows my mind that there are kids now, and when I say kids, I mean basically anybody under 40, because that's how old I am. But like when people sort of pull on a pair of running shoes for the first time and it's in his name, or if they, people host a whatever they do, a coffee morning or a golf day, or and often people raise money at funerals and things like that, when they still do it in his name, and he hasn't been around for so long, just absolutely blows my mind. But he was one of those very rare figures who kind of speak to everybody, whether he's a Newcastle fan or a Sunderland fan or Ipswich or England, wherever. He was just had those remarkable everyman qualities as a human being. Much missed, but still has this extraordinary legacy.
Yeah, absolutely. Now you're talking to the two members of the Toon Under Run Club, in Jack and myself. I'm in my off season at the moment. I'm more of your summer kind of guy who just ticks a box over the colder months to get through. But Jack, I'll let you quickly speak about what you're currently doing this year, and you can kind of go as deep as you want to go with what you're doing with the Sir Bobby Robson Foundation as well.
Yeah. So I've got personal family connection to the Bobby Robson Foundation. My sister had breast cancer, and she had sort of treatment through the foundation. So it's a very personal connection, as well as the football club, obviously. And I did the Great North Run in 2015. Moved to Australia. So I'm doing 10 half marathons in Australia this year for the Bobby Robson Foundation, which is like you were saying, George. Yeah, I've got a vest with his face on it, and it just really makes you feel proud, And he said that it was his last greatest team, didn't he? The foundation. There was a quote like that. And I was running in the Sunshine Coast on Sunday, and there was about 8 or 9 kilometers in, just when you're in the rhythm. And some guy behind me said, "Bobby Robson," and I got chatting to him, and I was chatting to him for a couple of kilometers. A guy from Tyne. And so we just ran together and had a chat, and I just thought, reflected that connection that you've got when you're 10,000 miles away from home, and you've got that connection. It's a very special thing. So the work the foundation does is fantastic. So we'll put the link to my fundraising thing in the notes for this in the comments. And any donations are grateful. But that was the reason why I was pleased to talk to you today, George, because I know that you do that work and you've got the connections there. So that's great what you said there.
Firstly, obviously, huge thank you for doing that. I mean, that means a lot. Again, that blows my mind. And yeah, good luck. I mean, and I feel your pain. I mean, one of the things, it's like the first time I did the Great North Run, I think I've done them all now apart from one since 2009, and you know, done them all for him. And it's like I feel like I carry the world on my shoulders when I do the Great North Run. It's like the best day of the year for me, but it's also the most emotional. It's the day when everything kind of comes out, and you know, it's like that. It's like watching the movie that you know is going to make you cry, and you almost cry in advance of the bit that makes you cry because you know you're going to cry. It's the same with me for the Great North Run. I know I'm going to get upset, and that sort of makes me get even more upset. But yeah, I mean, that's a very special thing to do. I've done similar myself. Try not to put too much pressure on your shoulders. Remember that, you know, it's not like people are judging you. People will only think that what you're doing is incredible and very special and a great thing to do. Yeah, and enjoy it and embrace it. But yeah, most of all, thank you. That's a brilliant thing to do.
You'll know some of the thoughts that go through your mind at about 18, 19 kilometers when you're in that much physical pain. You start thinking things like your kids are judging you, and what are people going to say if you don't get your time and stuff. It's just like the brain does
I've done all of that, had all of that I'm like letting Bobby down, that I'm letting my family down, that I'm a disgrace, and you know, all of that. Honestly, I've had all that when it's, you know, running is a very I mean, it's a brilliant way of, you know, keeping fit, and whether you're a sort of just you know, a hobby runner, you just like, you know, it's great for keeping the beer belly off. It's, you know, it's brilliant. And I think, you know, the best of it is it flushes your head free of all the kind of day-to-day nonsense when you get into that sort of zone and you're just running and it's just you, maybe a bit of music or podcast or, you know, whatever. It's great. But sometimes when you set yourself these challenges, you find that the brain flushes out and then it flushes back in again. And it's like you're suddenly kind of hyper aware of every little niggle. You're hyper aware of every bit of uncertainty in your own brain, and then it becomes quite a sort of bleak place. But yeah, I mean, I also just think, you know, doing these things, it's like, it's a brilliant challenge. The Great North Run, as I said before, I mean, you know, I love football, I love Newcastle, and but that for me is absolutely the best day of the year. You know, that sense of community around it, and it's a brilliant challenge. So I wouldn't want to put people off from doing these things because yeah, I mean, like I've done 4 or 5 marathons, and I think those things, they test you in a way as a human being we don't get tested very often. I mean, it's like you know, most of us, we live in a time of peace, thankfully, and you know, in terms of sort of hardship, most of us are kind of very lucky. But physically, those things push you to places that you don't often go to, and kind of coming through the other side does feel like a kind of great achievement.
Yeah, it's massive. So just like you said, Jack, we'll put the link in the show notes. If you want to follow Jack on Twitter or X, as some people call it now, it's at Jack Stanley 86. If you're listening to this, he posts all the run links and all that are on his social media too. So yeah, if you can donate, because it's a fantastic cause. So having said that, we'll move on to even more madder stuff. And I don't say this lightly, in terms of mad summers, this has probably been one of the maddest summers, even by Newcastle United standards. Like, we've had players in and out, the new sporting directors, new performance directors, one of the owners has left, and we've still got 2 and a bit weeks left of the transfer window with seemingly a lot of work to do. So, George, you've been around a while in terms of following the club. Is this one of the most maddest sort of off seasons that you can remember for Newcastle United?
I had a flash of reality when I was sitting down on Saturday at the weekend for the second game. I've been doing this job, or a version of it, for 30 years. Can you believe that? I know I don't look old enough, but hello. So in terms of maddest, I mean, it's certainly been one of the longest, and I think it's, you know, so it's almost, in some ways, it feels like the season hasn't ended. Last season hasn't ended. I mean, it already felt like an incredible incredibly long season. I mean, that's because we packed so much into it. A lot of it good, obviously the Champions League, the extra matches, getting to the quarterfinal of both cup competitions, domestic cup competitions, and those incredible high points that we had throughout the season. But then it just felt like it stretched on. There were those bits where all the injuries meant that Eddie was having to effectively select the same outfield 11. It was really difficult. And yeah, I felt like I'd lived through a season back in November. And it didn't, that didn't change. We got to the end of the season, thought we were in Europe. Then there was the postseason tour to Australia. Then we found out we weren't in Europe, thanks to Man United, as always, messing things up for us. And then, kind of straight from there into that kind of PSR thing, which, I mean, I think we knew were coming sort of externally outside the club. We knew were coming. I don't think any of us thought it would be this like second transfer deadline. And so it's like we already feel like we've been through one transfer deadline already, because that was incredibly stressful, and it was a mess, and it was very, very difficult. Talking to people inside the club at the time, it was not fun. They woke up the day before that deadline on June the 30th, and they still had a £60 million black hole in the club's accounts. And internally, they were talking about the possibility of a 10-point fine, 10-point deduction. Sorry, that's what they were looking at. So they got through that, but it did really take a toll. And I think people are still sort of picking up the pieces from that a bit. And then, yes, as you say, Amanda Staveley and Amanda Ghodoussi leaving. Again, externally, that was a surprise. And fundamentally, it changes the club. I mean, whether it becomes better or worse is yet to be established, but it's definitely different. And I think it's sad. I think it's sad because, Amanda in particular has been the sort of face and focal point of the club, not just for the last 3 years, but for 7 years, seen as this person who kind of recognized Newcastle's potential when not many other people were. And, hanging about, staying, pushing, not going away, keeping it going at times of, when pretty much she was the only person who thought there was still a chance it could happen, and then doing it. And, there's this sort of narrative about, oh, well, this is part of the process of Newcastle becoming more professional. And in terms of job titles, in terms of those positions, that's absolutely right. But it's not job titles. It's not a structure that brings success. It's people that bring success. It's having the right people in the right positions that brings success. And Newcastle have been incredibly successful with the kind of messy, strange, but intimate setup that they had. And, I've kind of written about this at length, but, one thing that we sort of don't often think about, there's this, again, the takeover happens and suddenly Newcastle are the richest club in the world, as we've all seen. That's actually not, that's very, very much theoretical. It's not factual, because they can't spend the money they have. And Newcastle really have been one of the smallest clubs in the world in terms of that core of people who've been running it. And on day one, it was Amanda and Murdad. Eddie Howe then comes in. There's no executive at the club. There's no commercial marketing department. None of that stuff exists. And they've built all of that up from an incredibly low base. We've seen the intimacy between Amanda and Eddie Howe. That's like, that has been an incredibly close relationship and very supportive. The first transfer window, they did everything themselves. We see that intimacy in terms of the dressing room photos, which other kind of clubs, fans of other clubs, call that small time. It's like they won nothing. They won a game of football. Why are they doing that? Well, for us, when wins didn't come around very often and were becoming increasingly rare, to win any game was a source of huge joy. We've seen that intimacy in the relationship all the way around the club, fans, players, staff, directors, all on the same page. We've not had that for decades, not had that for decades. So I'm kind of, I'm going on a bit on that, but, we've had this sort of incredibly close knit club. And that, for better or worse, is changing. And so when Eddie Howe talks about it being a difficult summer, as he did in Germany, that's what he's talking about. It's not to say that the club automatically becomes worse, but it also doesn't automatically become better. And so people are still finding their feet. And Paul Mitchell has come in, new sporting director, very highly rated. He specialises in recruitment, which is what Eddie Howe wanted. At the same time, he got no forward notice about that happening. Now, again, you can argue whether that's important or not. It is important in the context of Newcastle, where he knew everything because Amanda would tell him. So, yeah, it feels like it's becoming a different club, and for me, that's a sad thing, because I think there's been something very special and very different about Newcastle. I think we become a bit more like other clubs. Again, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, we just don't know yet.
I was going to ask you about Amanda, George, because obviously you know her and probably better than any of the other journalists, and you've had that connection since before the takeover as well, when she was around in 2017 around the Benitez time. It's quite hard, without going into sort of confidential information and discussions and things. Do you think it was always an inevitable part of the plan that, with the money involved and the PIF and everything and the plans for the stadium, and the Rubens were obviously got a lot of money as well. Do you think it was always part of the plan for her and Murad to move on at some point? Because it sounds like she was quite shocked, and she was definitely upset by it from your article and, the interview you did with her.
Yeah, so that came out. When did that come out? A couple of weeks ago, and so did that kind of big piece. And no, I mean, I asked her that directly. I sort of said, "Look, was this always the plan?" And she said, "No, that's absolute rubbish. It was never part of the plan. The plan was that they would stay." I mean, again, this is something that kind of people have kind of assumed that they were the brokers. They're the people that make things happen. They're the financiers. They're the people that get people, that get other people into a room, make something happen, and then move on to something else. But she said no, that the plan always was that they would stay involved. And I interviewed them both 2 years ago, and again they talked about their presence being there to help sort of turbocharge the decision-making process. That yes, this was before Darren Eales arrived, but yes, a chief executive would come in, yes, a sporting director would come in, that would help, but they would be there to focus on different things and make stuff happen quicker. Ultimately, I think, and let's get it right. They achieved a huge amount in their time there. I mean, part of their legacy was the Champions League season. Part of their legacy is, that incredible PSG game at home. One of the best things, one of the best occasions I've ever witnessed. It's there in the 2 promotions for the women's team. Absolutely sensational. The women's team going full-time professional, the first club in tier 3 to do that, and to be signing huge players now. I mean, that is that's a huge part of their legacy. There's legacies like that all across the club. I think increasingly, as the people that they helped bring in got their feet under the table, there was a concern that they were going to get in the way. And I suppose you can argue, you can say in retrospect that was going to be something that was always likely to happen, and they didn't want that to happen. So the discussions that they had internally were kind of very frank and very open. It's like, okay, well, what are our options here? They could have taken a step back and just, continued to be investors. But, there's a couple of things to say about that. Firstly, because they've been so heavily involved, that didn't appeal. The thing that Amanda spoke to me in kind of quite emotional terms, quite moving terms, is that she has Huntington's disease. It's a degenerative disease. And, she wants to work. She wants to work as long as possible. She is convinced that sort of that work is part of what keeps her mind active and busy. And she doesn't just want to sit around. She wants to kind of carry on working. And so this felt like the best decision to take. It was an incredibly painful decision, certainly from her perspective. Because she thought this was her football investment. She'd obviously fallen in love with Newcastle and Newcastle fans, and had these incredibly tight relationships with people across the club. So it was a very painful decision, but ultimately one that they thought was the right one to take.
You mentioned Paul Mitchell. Obviously, that appointment is huge for the club. He's well regarded all across Europe, and I'm sure most clubs, if they had an opening, would be looking for someone of his caliber. How much pressure do you think is on Mitchell for obviously this transfer window and going forward? And do you think he has more power now at the club than than potentially even Eddie has, and sort of the border and nailing the mast to Mitchell more so than Howe with Staveley and Ghodoussi now leaving?
Yeah, so I mean, all these things are still to play out. I mean, I think is the way that I would kind of answer that. I mean, we have to remember, like, when the takeover happened, they kind of built the club the wrong way around. I mean, it's like, in an ideal world, you would have a chief executive who would help appoint a sporting director, who would then help appoint a manager. Newcastle did that the other way around, and so, you know, you have to sort of deal with the reality that you've got. When sort of Dan Ashworth was on gardening leave, so we're kind of going back into the spring. Newcastle was sort of saying that there wasn't a huge rush to do what they did next, because this transfer window was more or less set in place in terms of targets, in terms of what they wanted to do. Having said that, I'm not sure that's the way it's panned out. I think Mitchell has been heavily involved in what's going on, and has clearly sort of tried to hit the ground running in that sense. That relationship between him and Howe is absolutely crucial moving forward. Again, I don't think that started off in the best way, because it was sprung on Howe in a way that, the approach for Dougie Freedman, Howe knew all about that in advance. He certainly approved of it. I know that he approves of Paul Mitchell and his reputation and what he's achieved before. And to say again, it's absolutely the kind of sporting director he wanted. Dan Ashworth, was much more of a sort of holistic sporting director, someone who, I think we all got very sick of hearing that phrase, center of the wheel, or whatever it was. But Newcastle needed someone to build up these sporting departments, whether it was, the foundation, whether it was recruitment, whether it was the medical department and all the other bits, and get that going again, get a functioning football department where everybody spoke to each other and were all on the same page, which just wasn't the case. It was a club that was stripped back, and it was in survival mode before the takeover. Now they feel that they want someone to kind of focus more obviously on recruitment. And I mean, in terms of pressure, again, we'll have to see how this plays out. But yeah, the way I look at it, Eddie has lost his most powerful and obvious supporter in the dressing room. He had this incredible safety net around him, certainly in Amanda and Murdad, not downplaying other members of the board, but I think when things got sticky last season, there was never a question that his position was under threat, and quite rightly, in my opinion. And that was good. Now, without them there, where does the ultimate decision making come from? Now, if somebody in Riyadh last season, if one of kind of PIF's power brokers in Riyadh had wanted to take a decision, I'm not sure how much Amanda and Murdad could have changed that. But their whole thought process was that they have the right manager and we stick with him, kind of come what may. How much that changes, I just don't know, because it's just not been tested. This season, everybody is targeting Europe. I mean, they're all saying that out loud. Darren Eales has said we've got to be in Europe. Bruno the other day said, I want to be back in the Champions League. Eddie Howe says, yes, I have to embrace this. This is, so they've set their target very early in a way that they just haven't done so far. The Champions League season, the season Newcastle finished 4th, they targeted top 10 in terms of budget, and they'd said anything better than last season, and which was 11th in terms of the football side. So things have changed. So what happens if, God forbid, Newcastle are 10th in October? I can't tell you, because we just haven't, this new structure hasn't been tested yet. I think, again, from my own perspective, I think, Eddie Howe has done more than enough to earn people's goodwill. They say, everybody acknowledges that Newcastle are not a top 6 club, and they're not. Eddie Howe has turned Newcastle into a top 4, top 7 team, and, done that brilliantly. It's not a top 6 club, but whether that holds, in a difficult run of results, I just don't know.
It's going to be interesting. It feels like the club's kind of got to, with 2.5, 3 years post takeover, got everything kind of right and where they wanted to be and got themselves in a position now to really just launch at a season and everything like that. And that's kind of what it's felt like this summer for me, is they've just kind of got these appointments settled now. We've got everything and got everyone who we need where they need to be, and let's have a crack at it. We've got at this stage not a great injury list, certainly compared to what the winter months were like last year. So it just feels like that they've just everything's ready to go and ready to launch into this season and see what had happened. So having said that, Dimi, I'll come to you first, mate. What are you looking forward to most about this season?
I'm looking forward to not playing 2 games a week, to be honest. I mean, look, we all want to play Europe, but given the shit show that was our injury list from, I think, December to February, where the same 11 or 12 players was playing every game, I think for us this season, to have 1 game a week with the way Eddie trains the players, with the intensity that we play at, I think that's going to be a massive opportunity for us. And I think there's no reason why we can't target a top 4, 5, 6 finish, because we're going to be playing hopefully with a fit team at 100% intensity levels every single weekend, whereas the teams potentially around us are going to be having 2 games a week, 3 games a week. And I think it's a massive opportunity for us, not only to do well in the league, but I really think that, I mean, we say it every year, but I really think this year could be the year that we may get back to Wembley and potentially hold something up. That would be fantastic. And I think this year I've just got a feeling that this year is going to be the year that we're going to do that, because we've sort of dipped our toe in a Carling Cup, or whatever they call it, Carabao Cup final now, and it was a couple of quarterfinal bursts last year with half a squad. So I think we're just about ready to make that step, and that's what.
Have you learned nothing? Have you learned nothing in this life?
I'm very positive.
He's not well.
This is.
I'm notoriously positive. Even last season when we were going those shit runs, I was in our little chat, I was predicting, we're going to win on the next 3 or 4 games, and I'm just one of those glass half full people, and sadly haven't learnt from the last 25, 30 years.
That's where your misery comes from.
Yeah.
No, it has to happen. I mean, that's the thing. That's the thing. It's not impossible now. I mean, for so long, it was just not ever going to be part of our life. It just wasn't. It was no way it was going to happen. You look at those, you look at the record under Ashley in terms of cup competitions. It wasn't something the club was contemplating. We weren't trying. We weren't bothered. And to be trying again and to be competitive again is just so appealing. I didn't mean to jump in there, but the one thing I do want to say, Dimi, that I kind of really agree with you. It kind of really hit me in that first game over the weekend, the Friday night game against Girona, and seeing Newcastle. Now, admittedly, Girona barely looked like they were sort of troubling themselves to kind of take part, but to see Newcastle tear forward and press right up the pitch, win the ball early, and try and kill the game off. It was like, okay, that's Newcastle. We've not seen that for 12 months. Really not seen that. I mean,
it was Oldcastle, wasn't it? Is that what you called it?
I said, yeah. Well, yeah.
Which it was.
And both of those games were a great reminder that actually Newcastle have got a good squad.
Yeah,
again, we didn't see that. As I said, we had some absolutely astonishing results last season. If you just look at the high points of last season and draw a line between them, it's the best season ever in lots of ways. It's just that there was a lot of terrible stuff as well. But that style, we haven't seen that style on a consistent basis since the 4th place season. And it's not just about having that first 11. It's about having the second 11, or as many of them as possible, who can come on after 60 minutes and at the moment that the opposition are knackered, and then give them something else to think about. And that's what we're going to see this season. Emil Kraft, Eddie Howe was very cagey afterwards, because I asked him about this. Is that the way you're going to play? But Emil Kraft let the cat out of the bag. Sorry, Eddie. But he said that is how we're going to play home and away next season. Press high, win the ball back early, and try and kill games off. And that is so exciting because, again, I don't want to be like the voice of stupid positivity, because I know there's a lot of angst about Newcastle not like strengthening the first team, but Newcastle's first team is automatically stronger by being
healthier,
fitter and available. It's not just about being available, it's also about being fit. And they tried to build a team for the Champions League last summer. That didn't work for obvious reasons. I mean, Tonali, nobody could have kind of done very much about that. Harvey Barnes ends up being injured for most of the season. Lewis Hall can't get himself into the team until the end of the season. But Newcastle now have a squad that they built for the Champions League in a season when they don't have Europe. So I agree. This isn't the opportunity they wanted. They were desperate to get back into Europe. I think, if you want to be a big club, you've got to show that you can get into Europe and then stay in Europe. Now, as things stand, Newcastle have kept hold of their best players, which is really good and really important. But moving forward, they absolutely have to be back there, which is why they're targeting it. But I agree with you. I think they've got a good. I mean, I would put caveats in it, because Newcastle will be one of 7, 8 teams who will be thinking the Champions League is a realistic proposition for them. And of all of those clubs, Newcastle are coming from the lowest base. Yes, they've spent a lot of money, but they're coming from the lowest base in terms of finances, in terms of the squad. I'm sorry, I'll go off in all sorts of tangents here, but yes, Chelsea have been an absolute shit show over the past couple of seasons. But my God, look where they came from, 2 or 3 seasons ago, and look how much money they spent. Same for Manchester United. Newcastle can't compete in lots of ways with those clubs. The fact that they're competing on the pitch is testament to Eddie Howe.
Absolutely, and we spoke about this earlier in this year, that although the clubs that don't have the resources of probably maybe the top 4, they've all sold a player for a lot of money, which has funded their sort of transfer business. Like Aston Villa sold Jack Grealish for stupid amounts of money. Tottenham had sold Harry Kane now for stupid amounts of money. And it just, we don't have, we never bought players. So we don't have a good player that we can sell for a lot of money to kind of fund new players coming in. And it kind of got to the point where we couldn't do anything, and we had to sell, obviously, Elliot Anderson and Yakuba Minte just to try and get out of, like we spoke about earlier, the PSR hole. And now the fact that we've still got all our players this season fit and available is great. And a week between games, like Dimi said, it's going to be, I think it's going to be a great season.
Yeah, I mean, the point you make about selling is a absolutely important, vital one. It's not something we want to think about, because I think as Newcastle fans, we've got that sort of visceral response to it, because we're so used to our best players going, and Newcastle being a stepping stone club. I mean, it's, I can think about that, going back to my youth, people like Beardsley and Waddle and Gascoigne leaving, and then, more recently, Andy Carroll, and, people like, that you should be building a team around going. And we sort of hate that thought, but this is part of the model. It's part of everybody's model. You mentioned some big players there, but you can look at Declan Rice and West Ham. They're able to spend now because they brought in £100 million. You look at what Man City have done. I mean, Man City have done it absolutely brilliantly. They've just sold Alvarez for, whatever it is, £82 million. At some point, Newcastle have to do that. That's all. That's been the case when they signed Bruno. They didn't talk about it in public, but they said, if in a few years we've doubled our money on him, that's good business, and then that money gets reinvested. And because of the way PSR works, bringing in that huge amount of profit then allows you to kind of go big again. It's just that Bruno's so bloody good, and Isak's so bloody good, and Gordon so good. Yes. We just don't want that to happen, and we're not sort of ready for that. But at the same time, the tricky thing is, the team have done so well, and those individual players are doing so well. The danger is that they outstrip the pace of the club. And again, I'm gratified, So I spoke last week. I spoke to Peter Silverstone and Brad Billett, who were the chief operating officer and chief commercial officer at the club. Anyway, it's great that these people are now willing to talk in public. But they know that the first team has absolutely outstripped the pace of their development as a club. I mean, it's just. It's not. That's not and shouldn't be a surprise. I mean, Newcastle, as I said earlier, Newcastle are catching up from an incredibly low base. There's in terms of like revenue, I think Newcastle's last last annual figures showed sort of a revenue of £250 million. That's annual revenue. Now, Manchester United earned 278 million in terms of revenue in 2009. And their last figures show it's something like 650 million. That's how far away Newcastle are. So, then with the best will in the world, they're not going to be able to kind of catch up in terms of PSR on that side. It's going to take a long, long time. The way that they jumpstart PSR is by selling. And so at some point that's got to happen. You want it to be at the timing that Man City, because they've got all these incredible assets, it's almost like, they can choose when to do it. And they do it and it suits them. They do it and it doesn't weaken them because they're so strong. We've seen it with Liverpool and Mane. You pick the time to do it and you get stronger because of it. It's going to be very, very difficult for Newcastle to get better than Bruno. It's almost impossible to get better than Isak because he's so good. And, that's where they are in their progress. They have to become better at selling. They've been terrible at selling over the years, in part because they've not had the assets, in part because they've been reluctant to sell. They've taken the decision to keep what they have rather than reinvesting and trying to get stronger. And so it's left them with aging assets and, not much room for maneuver. I think it's a crying shame, really depressing, that the PSR model benefits clubs selling the players that they've produced. I mean, Minter, we didn't get to see, obviously. That's a huge shame. We almost sort of don't feel that loss because he hasn't played at St James's. We're not seeing it. But somebody like Elliot Anderson, who's I'm desperately sorry he didn't get the chance to sort of show more of what he could do last season because of injury. But he's one of our own. He's exceptionally talented. I'd have been really excited to see how he could have grown under Eddie Howe. Newcastle have done good business, in inverted commas, in terms of the money they brought in for those two players. But it's just an absolute nonsense that the easiest way to profit is by selling players, homegrown players that you should be building a team around.
Yeah.
Do you think that the club thought they were going to sell Bruno this summer? Because it felt like there was a lot of groundwork built towards that. And obviously 100 million release clause, and even if they'd got 80, 90 million for him, that would have wiped out the PSR problem in one go. Do you think that was part of the plan, or do you think...
No, I mean... The way it's been put to me is that the strategy was never to sell their best players, that was to try and go for one more, not one more season, because it makes it sound like I'm putting a time limit on it. But I think if you're, Bruno is amazing. He's wonderful. He's never shown any indication of wanting to leave in the terms of what he said in public. But if you are him, you must think a little bit that the clock's ticking. As he said on Thursday, I want to be in the Champions League. He wants to win things. And again, this is the fear that Newcastle have progressed so quickly, so far ahead of schedule in terms of the first team, that the pace of their development outstrips what the club is capable of kind of delivering on a season by season basis. That's why it's really important to kind of get back into Europe and to be challenging for trophies. I don't think they wanted him to leave. I think they thought there was a chance that clause might be tested, and in the end it wasn't. So and obviously they put a lot of work into getting him to agree a new contract in the first place. Same with Joelinton. They're talking to Anthony Gordon now about a new contract. These players are incredibly difficult to replace, but it is, as Darren Eales has said, every player has a price under this PSR model, and to some extent, it kind of depends on the attitude of those players too. If they decide they want to go, it then becomes very difficult for Newcastle to keep them.
Now, speaking of, we'll call them the big three. Maybe Jack, I'll come to you first. Who's a player that you're most looking forward to watching this season that's not called Alexander, Anthony, or Bruno?
I think it's probably Tonali, to be fair. Because I know it's a cliche, but he's like a new signing. He is like a new signing. We only saw him for, was it even 12 games? I didn't even think it was that many. So, yeah, I think he's had a year to bed in now. He's learned what Eddie wants him to do. He's apparently learned English. Bruno is saying his English is really good now. A few other people have said that.
Yeah,
and he seems to be really a big part of the culture in the squad as well. So that's a really big thing for him. So I'm really looking forward to seeing Tonali, and also Joe Willock, who's coming back from his injury. I think there's a lot more to come from him. That assist for Isak's goal against Spurs, I'll never ever forget that. I think that he's got that quality, and he brings something else into that midfield. So the midfield will look very different, completely reshaped, I think, with those two. So I'd say they're the ones I'm most looking forward to seeing this season.
Dimi, how about you, mate?
One from a little bit of left field. I mean, he's a bit of a forgotten man now because he's injured, but I was very excited to see Lewis Miley last season, and he played football way behind his years and his experience level. He sort of was thrust into the first 11, probably more so due to injuries than anything else. But he thrived. I mean, he was playing Champions League football. He was playing week in, week out Premier League football. Probably too much football, if we're honest. But I'm very excited to see how he's going to develop this season. With the players around him, with your Brunos, your Tonalis, Joe Linton, there's going to be obviously less pressure on him, and he's probably not going to get as many minutes. But I think that kid is a superstar in waiting, and I think that he's going to thrive in a lesser role, if that makes sense. And I think any minute he gets, he's going to be such a key weapon for us because his quality is undeniable. And yeah, obviously he's a local lad as well, which is fantastic to see. But I think he's going to have another step up season and probably less pressure for him, which is great.
Yeah, awesome. Now, George, I'll come to you. Your answer might be a little bit different to ours because it's easy for us to watch the TV and come to who we like watching and stuff like that. But given someone like yourself, where you do with your line of work, you do kind of start forming these a bit more of a personal relationship more than a fan relationship with the players and stuff like that. So is there someone who you kind of like watching who isn't Alexander, Anthony, or Bruno?
Well, I mean, I agree with Jack in terms of this coming season, who I'm most looking forward to seeing. I think, Tonali, he does speak very good English now. He spoke at a fans event in Japan, and pretty emotional actually, talking about wanting to sort of reset this season. Everyone says how much of a good lad he is, that he's thrown himself into it. Talking earlier about the sort of intimacy of relationships in the club, there's been only support for him after what happened. Now he fucked up our season in lots of ways, if you don't mind me using that language. And it's not his fault. He's got it's a terrible disease that he's got, and that's exactly how it's been treated. There's been no blame attached to him. It was very difficult, I think, for Eddie Howe, the first team, to see him being there fit and available in those training sessions when there were no players to choose from, but he's used the time well. His English is excellent. He has been, focusing in on specific areas of his game to improve upon. And, as Jack says, I think the idea of him being up to speed, playing the Eddie Howe style, ready to perform in the way that he wants, is just incredibly exciting. We forget there's been a lot of sort of game changers in terms of transfers since the takeover, from Trippier, the first one, the absolute tone setter, to Bruno, to Isak, smashing the club record. But Tonali, it was the first time Newcastle had kind of gone to a real European powerhouse club, taken their best player off them, and just a huge deal. And the idea, of course, one of the ideas was to alleviate a bit of the pressure on Bruno, who Newcastle are incapable of winning without. Have been incapable of winning without. I'm just really, really excited to see him come back. I mean, I was going to say I'd put money on something. That's absolutely the wrong thing I should say.
Be careful.
It's like, I would not be at all surprised if he got booked within about 3 seconds of coming on the pitch. He's going to be so fired up. But yeah, I mean, I can't wait to see. I can't wait to see his potential. And again, you go back to November, December, where it was the same midfield three being picked week in, week out, and Newcastle actually have a lot of strength there when everybody's fit. You talk about Joe Willock, yeah, absolutely. Miley to come back into it. Sean Longstaff, who got a lot of stick last season, but was playing with a broken foot and a dodgy ankle, and came back early, came back from, I think it was the second injury was a 10-week injury. He came back after 4 weeks to be in the team, to make himself available. And, he still managed to kind of score more goals last season than I think the rest of his seasons put together. He's got a couple in pre-season. What I love about this squad is that they're very supportive of each other. They still have that tight-knit feel, and players continue to rise. Jacob Murphy would not be everybody's first choice for a right wing slot this season. We know that the club are looking in that position and have done for a long time. He's got 5 goals in pre-season. That says a lot about his personality and his character, and it says a lot about the squad as well. And yeah, I'm excited to sort of see. I think there was like those brilliant moments at the very start of last season and the season before when you could see players coming onto the pitch pissed off in a productive way, in a good way, but like that thing between Isak and Wilson, they were like coming on, pushing each other. And we've just had none of that for almost a year. And, the thought of having that back, having that real competition, but a good spirit where everyone's pushing each other upwards is, very exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like you said, there's not many players anywhere in any sport that have a 10-month pre-season. So, like Tonali would be absolutely chomping at the bit to get started, knowing he's been fully fit this whole time and stuff like that. So I can't wait to watch him either. We'll quickly go through the other couple of things. You player of the year, Dimi. Who are you tipping for that?
Isak.
Nice, Jack.
Yeah, same. He's world class. He's probably one of the best strikers in the world, and it's absolutely obscene that he even plays for Newcastle. It's really hard to get your head around that. A world-class striker, but I think it'll be him. And I think hopefully we, like George was saying, the club can progress. We can get back in the Champions League, because we will find it hard to keep hold of players like him next summer if we're not in the Champions League, I think. So yeah, Isak.
Was that player of the season?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I this is frightening because like when he arrived, it was a lot of money. I mean, it's like, so a lot of the business Newcastle have done, they've been very canny. Whether it was Bruno, whether it was Botman, they've kind of got in there early with players who had a reputation in Europe, and they got to them first. Now with Isak, he was the one that was, very much a known quantity, and he kind of arrived with people sort of saying that, this guy on his day is brilliant, but on his day that might happen 1 week in 3. And last season, I think we saw for the first time, we saw an Isak who is on it every week. And, what I've seen in pre-season now, it's pre-season in Japan. It's very difficult to draw any conclusions because the conditions were so ridiculous. But the one conclusion I did draw was that Isak already looks ready to go up another level. And I don't know, I find that quite difficult to know what that actually even looks like, because last season was so good. But I'm sure he would have wanted to have been involved in the European Championships. It's a stage that he would, that he deserves to play on. But the idea that Newcastle can benefit from him having a free summer is really kind of beguiling. He's come back, like in Japan, he was demanding the ball. He wanted to score goals, even in those sort of even those like ridiculous conditions. And you could see him moving into places on the pitch that at that point were still beyond his teammates, because they just weren't up to his speed. And I know he missed a penalty at the weekend, proving that that he isn't a kind of robot, but some of the stuff he did in order to win that penalty and around it was just so impressive. I agree with you. I mean, it's not that I wasn't convinced when he signed, but it was like, okay, he's not really a number 9, and we've got a great number 9 in Callum Wilson, albeit with the caveats about his fitness. He's like number 9 plus. He's like number 9, number 10. He's everything. He's got everything. He glides on the pitch. He's got that incredible sense of where to be. And I think the one thing that you could argue was missing from his armory was that, has he got that absolute desire to put his body where it hurts to score a goal? I think, there's different ways of being a centre forward. There are different ways of being a striker, but my God, he wants to score goals. And that's just, we're incredibly lucky to have him. He is the one player I think is irreplaceable, just because of the amount of money it costs to replace goals. I think he is an absolute superstar.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm with you, Jack. I still can't believe we've got a player like him that we can watch every week. It's mind-boggling. Dimi, so I'll give you got two options here. You can give us a finishing position, or I'll give you a three position range if you want.
No, I'll give you a position. I'm
I
not
didn't think
one
you were
to
going
sit
to
on
go
the
for the
fence.
range at all.
I'm no fence sitter, but I think we're going to finish third this season, and the reason I think we're going to finish third is Manchester City. I think they're going to walk the league again as they normally do. I think Arsenal are probably going to be pushing them on the way, but I think that with Liverpool's new manager and the shenanigans going on at Old Trafford, I think there's no reason why we can't be above both of those clubs. And I think with one game a week and with another year under Eddie Howe and new signings, Tonali, hopefully we get Gaye through the door. Maybe we'll get another right winger through the door. I think we're primed to be right in that mix, to be in the top four, but more so in the top four, to be comfortably in third. And people forget the year we finished fourth, we were third for most of that season, and we only dropped off sort of late in the year where Man United jumped us. We were third, pushing top two for most of the season. So I think third is going to be where we finish, and let's see.
Jack?
I think on paper, the first team, I think, is probably the fourth best in the league, I think, if everyone's fit. We haven't got Europe to worry about. Hopefully get a few more signings in. Listening to George before, and you were talking about, the strength in depth. I remember that Villa game last season where we brought Harvey Barnes, Callum Wilson on off the bench, and Tonali played an absolute blinder, and Longstaff came on as well, and it was just a vision into what that season could have been. And then obviously Europe happened and everything, the fitness, and we still managed to get a decent finish. So, and if Nick Pope hadn't got injured, we probably would have came fourth or fifth. I think he's worth 10, 11 points, and we would have been up there with Villa. So I think we're not going to have as much bad luck this season in terms of cup draw as well. Man City away in every cup. So I think that we will finish either fourth or fifth. I'm going to be positive and say fourth and back in the Champions League.
Nice. George?
Well, I think I've predicted, I think in the Athletic I've sort of said fifth, which of course could be good enough for the Champions League, depending on circumstances. I would always prefer to predict down and then be pleasantly surprised with by better. I mean, I would just, sticking to my lifetime sort of mantra. And, I think the other thing is, I don't want to be one of those people kind of putting pressure on the team, because I think they don't deserve that. Having said that, they'll be targeting fourth or better. I'm sure they will. So, I guess, Man City, Arsenal. I don't think Newcastle are going to catch those two teams. I think they're better. Just in terms of resources, just in terms of coming from a much higher base than Newcastle, they've had much longer at this. And in terms of the rest, I find it very difficult. To predict. I mean, I think there will be chaos at some of those bigger clubs, but as I said earlier, you've now do have 7, 8, maybe more clubs thinking that they should be in the Champions League as well. So, they're just as capable of having good seasons as they are as having bad seasons. If you were to offer me a cup, I wouldn't care about the league position. I mean, that would make me, I'm sure, unlike a lot of Newcastle fans, I've seen the Champions League. I've done it. It's brilliant. It's amazing. I know the club have to be there, moving forward, both in terms of money and prestige and glamour and signing players and keeping players. But I don't care about that. It's just more games of football. I want to see Newcastle win something. That's the thing that I've not seen. It's the only thing I've not seen us do. And if you were to offer me that, I don't care about the rest of it. I would celebrate, and then you would find me 2 or 3 weeks later on a park bench with a very long beard and a can of beer, probably retired, probably sacked.
Yeah.
I'd be very happy.
Come live in Australia with us. That'd be all right.
Yeah, that's normal, mate. You see that every day when you walk down the road. Quickly before we wrap up, George, thank you for your time again. It would be remiss of us not to, I guess, probe any transfer activity that you might know of, or any updates on incomings or outgoings or anything like that.
Yeah, so as of yesterday, there was a third bid for Mark Gahey, but the word coming out was that it's time for Newcastle to sort of move on and look at other options now, whether that's a bit of game playing and whether that's a bit of a manoeuvring in terms of trying to sort of focus minds at Crystal Palace or not. I don't know. They've shown that they're capable of doing that before. They're capable of, holding sort of multiple discussions over the same player. They did a bit of this with Tonali last season, which kind of came out of the blue. But yeah, we're still waiting. What are we? We're now into the kind of second week of the Mark Gahey thing, and we're looking. We're kind of waiting to see what Palace do with that third bid, and then see if there's movement. On the other side of things, Newcastle do need to trade. They still need to trade, and what they want to do is avoid anything resembling what happened in June in terms of PSR. So they want to do business now. I know people struggle to get their heads around this, and I don't blame them, but it's like they've just sold these two players. Why do they need to sell players now? Well, they sold players in the last financial year,
last time,
and that has now reset. And so, albeit that gives them maneuver to spend, it also means that they have to kind of keep doing that. They've spent a phenomenal amount of money since the takeover. They've got to keep it ticking over. So there's renewed interest in Almiron from MLS clubs. So we'll have to see what happens there. And yeah, I mean, I expect them to be busy before the end of the window. But at the moment, we're waiting to hear on the Mark Gahey bid.
Yeah, I think once that kind of falls one way or the other, I think we'll probably end up with a fair bit more going on for the last couple of weeks. But that might wrap us up. George, I know you're a very, very busy man, so we can't thank you enough for your time as well, especially, like I said, with the last couple of weeks of the transfer window. This Gahey stuff seems to be sort of bubbling along as well. So for you to find an hour for us, it means a lot, mate. So thank you very much for that.
Total pleasure. No, absolute pleasure. You mustn't thank me for that. This is one of the great joys of my job and privileges of it. And as you've seen, I don't need much encouragement just to rub it on and go off in all different directions. Because I'm very passionate about the club and the team, and I'm a fan myself, and hugely excited by what's going on at the moment, and always want more. But no, chatting about it is one of the great joys. So thank you for inviting me, and we'll do it again if you'll have me.
Absolutely, we'd love to. Jack, Dimi, thank you very much for your time as well, gentlemen. Thanks everyone for watching and listening. Stay tuned. We'll probably have a preview later on in the week for the first game of the season against Southampton. But yeah, that'll do for now. Thanks everyone for watching, listening, and yeah, we'll see you next time. Thanks everyone.
Thanks, Keegan. Thanks, George. See ya.
Cheers, mate.
Cheers.